The dimly lit room was filled with the roar of the crowd, loud cheers, and gasps echoing against the brick walls as fighters exchanged brutal punches and kicks in the center of the arena. The underground fight club was a hidden world, one where the wealthy and the dangerous gathered to watch fights that were raw, unfiltered, and relentless. YN, with her carefree attitude and clumsy demeanor, had never seen anything like it. Dragged along by her overly eager friend, Mia, who had been dying to see the infamous underground fights, YN found herself in a seat near the back, trying to act calm despite the tense atmosphere. Mia was practically bouncing with excitement, while YN just tried not to trip over her own feet as they made their way through the crowded space. "I can't believe we're here. This is going to be so crazy," Mia said, practically vibrating in her seat. YN looked around, her eyes wide as she tried to take it all in. The people were intense, their eyes glued to the fighters, and the energy in the air was thick with anticipation. She sighed and sank back into her chair, trying to relax despite the chaos. And that's when she noticed him. Sitting quietly next to her, dressed in a simple black hoodie and sweatpants, was a man with dark, intense eyes and a posture that screamed danger. He was silent, watching the fight intently, his face unreadable. YN didn't think much of it at first, too busy trying to not spill her drink as she fidgeted nervously in her seat. But then, her curiosity got the better of her. "Hey, you watching this too?" YN asked, turning to the guy beside her with an easy smile. "The fights are pretty crazy, huh?" He didn't respond. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. His focus was still on the ongoing match. YN blinked, her smile faltering. She tried again, a little more energetic. "You know, I was kind of expecting a bit more. But hey, I guess I should have expected this much noise from a secret fight club, right?" She giggled to herself, completely oblivious to the tension around her. Still no response. Okay, if he wanted to ignore her, that was fine. But YN wasn't one to back down easily, and she decided that maybe she could have a little fun with him. "You know," YN leaned in, her voice a little louder than before, "I think you're a bit too quiet for a fight fan. You're not even reacting. Do you even like this stuff? Or are you just here for the snacks?" She giggled, nudging him playfully. The guy didn't move an inch. YN could feel her face heating up. Clearly, he wasn't interested in her attempts at making conversation. "Wow, tough crowd," YN smirked. "I guess I'll just keep talking to myself, huh? Not like I need any help being awkward or anything." And then, in a moment of boldness, YN decided to push her luck. "Hey, you look like someone who can handle themselves in a fight. I bet you couldn't even win the next match if you tried," she said, turning her gaze back to the ring. There was a pause. The silence between them seemed to stretch out, thick with unspoken tension. Then, the man beside her finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not interested in small baby fights," he said, his tone so indifferent it was almost chilling. YN blinked, surprised by his response. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as a mischievous grin spread across her face. "Oh, so you think you're too good for this place? I guess I'll just have to find out, won't I?" YN teased, her voice dripping with playful sarcasm. "You're probably scared, huh? Too scared to show what you've got." The man didn't flinch. His eyes flicked toward her for a brief moment, but he said nothing. YN was enjoying herself a bit too much now. She was certain he was just being a typical tough guy, and it was her job to knock him off his high horse. "Fine," she said, her tone switching to mockingly serious. "If you win the next match, I'll make it worth your while." That got his attention. He turned to her, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "What's the catch?" YN, in her usual clumsy fashion, waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing too crazy. If you win, I'll kiss you. It was out before she even had time to process the words. Her eyes widened as she realized what she had just said. Her mouth opened and closed in quick succession as she fumbled to cover up the slip. Wait, no, that came out wrong. YN stammered, flustered and awkward. I didn't mean to say you. Forget it. But it was too late. He'd heard her, and his lips curled into a knowing smirk. Deal, he said. His voice smooth as silk, full of calm confidence. YN's heart skipped a beat as she watched him stand up and walk toward the ring. She had no idea who he was, or how he knew this fight was going to be his. But as he entered the arena, there was a palpable shift in the air. The entire crowd seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing something was about to change. As the fight began, YN couldn't help but stare at the man her quiet, mysterious neighbor who had just agreed to a bet he had no reason to take. What was it about him that made her think he might just win? As she leaned forward in her seat, anticipation bubbling inside her, YN had no idea that the fight unfolding before her was only the beginning of a whole new world she had just stepped into, a world that would change her in ways she never could have imagined. YN sat on the edge of her seat, eyes glued to the ring. Her heart raced, not from the intensity of the match, but from the unexpected tension between her and the man. Jungkook. That's what the crowd murmured. He had just stepped into the ring, and something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself with such calm confidence, made her pulse quicken. She had no idea who he was. In fact, she barely knew anything about the underground fight scene. But now, as she watched Jungkook stand tall in the center of the ring, all eyes on him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was something more than just a fighter. The crowd around her seemed to sense it too. The loud, chaotic energy suddenly hushed as people leaned in, murmuring amongst themselves. YN shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling like she had just walked into a scene she wasn't prepared for. The opponent he faced was much larger, more built, and had the crowd's favor. The man was known for taking out opponents with ease. But as the fight began, it became clear that Jungkook was a force to be reckoned with. With a few swift movements, Jungkook dodged a powerful punch aimed directly at his face, his body fluid and precise. He retaliated with a brutal right hook that sent his opponent stumbling back. The crowd gasped, but Jungkook remained eerily calm. His eyes never left his opponent, as if the entire match was just another form of entertainment for him. YN, for the first time since arriving, was on the edge of her seat, her eyes wide in disbelief. Holy crap, she muttered under her breath. The fight intensified. Jungkook moved with the grace of a dancer, but hit with the power of a beast. Every strike was calculated and deliberate. His opponent, though strong, was no match for the precise, unyielding strikes Jungkook delivered. In a matter of minutes, it was over. His opponent crumpled to the floor, unable to get up. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Jungkook didn't even break a sweat. He casually walked back to the edge of the ring, eyes still locked on the man he had just defeated, his expression still unreadable. YN couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The energy in the room was electric, and yet there was something about Jungkook that made him seem detached, as though this wasn't a fight for him, but something far more serious. When he reached her seat, she could barely catch her breath. So, YN began, trying to keep her voice steady as she looked up at him. Guess you weren't joking about the baby fights thing, huh? Jungkook raised an eyebrow, his eyes piercing through her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He was clearly amused by her attempt at lightheartedness, but something in his gaze told her that this was all more than just a casual bet. You're lucky I kept my end of the bargain, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. YN gulped, her mind racing as she remembered the ridiculous bet she'd made earlier. Her face flushed a deep shade of crimson, and she fumbled for something to say to cover up her awkwardness. I, didn't really think you'd win that quickly, to be honest. She chuckled nervously, running a hand through her hair. But hey, a deal's a deal, right? You won fair and square. Jungkook smirked, stepping closer to her, his presence looming. So, when do I get my reward? Wynen's heart skipped a beat, and she froze. Of course, he was going to remind her of that ridiculous kiss she had promised. She hadn't even thought he would take her seriously. But now, the weight of her words was hanging in the air between them. Well, I guess it's time to make good on that, huh? Wyne said, her voice suddenly a lot softer. She had no idea what to do, her thoughts swirling with the intensity of the moment. Jungkook didn't say anything in response. Instead, he leaned in slightly, as if daring her to follow through. YN, feeling a rush of nervous energy, quickly turned her head, trying to distract herself. I didn't think you'd actually be, that good. I thought I was just making fun of you for being all serious. But you really know what you're doing in there. Jungkook chuckled darkly. You're not getting out of it that easily. YN winced. Right, fine. A deal's a deal. There was no way she could back out now. She had said it, and Jungkook was waiting. His confidence, his smirk, it all made her feel completely out of her depth. As she stood up to face him, YN hesitated for just a second, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to vanish. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, and all she could hear was the rush of her own heartbeat. Then, without thinking too much, she leaned forward and quickly pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Jungkook didn't move. His gaze never left hers as she pulled back, and for a second, neither of them said anything. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. Not bad, Jungkook said, his voice low and smooth, a hint of amusement in his tone. But next time, you might want to make it count. YN blinked, caught off guard by his words. She could feel the heat in her cheeks rising once again, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and excitement. What had she gotten herself into? Jungkook's smirk didn't fade as he turned and made his way back toward the fighters' area. But before he disappeared into the shadows, he looked over his shoulder at her. This isn't over, he said cryptically, his words hanging in the air. The kiss on her cheek was supposed to be a casual thing, a quick and awkward gesture to fulfill a bet. But the lingering intensity in Jungkook's eyes made her feel like she had just stepped into something far deeper than she had ever imagined. As YN stood there, still processing what had just happened, her heart hammered in her chest. The crowd around her seemed to fade into the background. The noise, the energy, all of it felt distant as she struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. She had kissed him. But that wasn't the end of it, was it? Before she could fully gather her thoughts, a sudden movement caught her attention. Jungkook, still standing with his back turned to her, paused. The coolness of his previous demeanor faded into something far more dangerous. He turned around slowly, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, something raw, unspoken, that made her breath catch in her throat. Without saying a word, he took a few deliberate steps toward her, his presence overwhelming. YN's heart raced, and she instinctively took a step back, but he was already too close. The smirk that had been on his lips earlier was gone, replaced by something far more serious. Something electric. Before she could react, Jungkook's hand reached up and cupped her face gently, his touch warm yet commanding. Her breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips just inches from hers. I said next time, he whispered, his voice thick with meaning. Her mind screamed at her to pull away, to stop this madness before it went any further. But she couldn't move. Her body seemed to be frozen in place, caught in the intensity of the moment. And then, without any warning, Jungkook closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a sudden, streamy kiss. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was deep, urgent, as if he were claiming her in a way that both shocked and ignited something inside her. The kiss was like a spark to dry tinder, intense, consuming. His hand on her face pulled her closer, his other hand sliding to her waist, anchoring her to him. YN felt her entire body come alive, every nerve tingling under his touch. Her hands, almost without thinking, found their way to his chest, unsure of what to do, but unable to pull away. Her heart pounded in her ears as the kiss deepened, the air between them charged with electricity. Time seemed to slow, and yet, in that brief moment, YN felt as though the whole world had shifted. The noise of the crowd, the world outside the fight club, all of it faded into nothingness. It was just the two of them, caught in the heat of the moment. But just as quickly as it started, Jungkook pulled away, leaving her breathless and dizzy. His eyes were locked on hers. There was an unreadable intensity in his gaze. YN stood there, stunned, her mind reeling as she tried to catch her breath. Her lips still tingled from his touch, and her heart was racing wildly in her chest. She had no idea what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. Jungkook turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her standing there, completely lost in the whirlwind of what had just transpired. As the fight club buzzed around her, YN couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far bigger than herself. A world she wasn't sure she was ready for, but one that seemed impossible to escape.